Well, good evening. I guess we can get started. Welcome on this chilly evening. I hope you're someplace warm and cozy. If anyone is zooming in from outside Minnesota, I can report that the air temperature here, according to my local favorite app, is currently 5 below, and the overnight low is expected to be 19 below, with a wind chill forecast of 29 below. So even though Zen Center is closed right now, I'd like you to use your imagination and pretend that we're sitting in the Zendo and the west wind is zipping across Bede Makaska, and we are all nice and cozy inside the Zendo, maybe meditating, and we're going to be listening to this Dharma talk. You can see the title is Stopping by the Zendo on a Snowy Evening. Now I'm going to be sharing my screen throughout the talk off and on, just like Bill Wood did so like effectively last week. And I think since we can't be face to face, I decided that I would take advantage of the Zoom technology to try to use a few extra things, graphics and stuff like that, that we wouldn't normally be able to do during a Dharma talk. So before I get into the meat of the Dharma talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, because some of you don't know me. My name's Randy Wedin. I'm a lay teacher in training, and I started coming to the Zen Center almost 15 years ago. My interest in Buddhism goes back further than that, over 20 years ago, when I started reading people like Ken Wilber and Thich Nhat Hanh and Suzuki Roshi. Now, another thing that it would be useful for you to know about me is that my professional training was spent as a science writer. That's my career and training was as a scientist. But I found that my real calling was not working at the lab bench, but rather it was communicating about science with others. And right now, one of my current passions is thinking about the relationship between science and Zen Buddhism. So that's going to be very apparent as we get into this Dharma talk. Now, this title, Stopping by the Zendo on a Snowy Evening, you'll probably recognize, some of you, as that I borrowed this from a famous poem by Robert Frost titled Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. So let's start by looking at that poem. And let me read that, and you can follow along. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So here's my interpretation of this poem. The writer stops in the middle of the woods with no one around to look out at into the snowy woods. The writer's simply stopping, just taking in the beauty and wonder and awe of the deep, dark forest. He's fully experiencing a moment of mindfulness. But the horse shakes his harness and bells, and he's wondering, what's going on? What's going on? Why are we stopping? So that snaps the writer out of that moment of mindfulness and returns the writer back to his normal mode of thinking, which is worrying about the future. I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So now I want you to use your imagination a bit and think we're sitting back in this Zendo tonight and envision someone walking by the Zen center on the sidewalk, hopefully dressed very warmly, looking into the Zendo, and this person stops and takes a look at the beauty and the wonder of this building and these lights and thinks to themselves, I wonder what this Zen meditation stuff is all about. I wonder what it would do for me. Maybe someday I'll check it out. And then that moment of mindfulness is gone and the person goes on their way thinking about the future or the past or their desires, their worries, their regrets. So anyway, about 15 years ago, I was that person standing outside the Zendo wondering what's going on inside. What does Zen meditation and the Zen Center have to offer me? So one day I finally walked through those doors and everything became crystal clear. I became enlightened. No, not really. Not at all. In fact, I was just mystified and confused. The words and concepts that everyone was throwing around, it made very little sense to me. One of the first things I heard was the Heart Sutra. Now I'm going to read a little excerpt from the Heart Sutra and just listen to these words with the ears, with your ears, listen to them like you were a beginner, hearing them for the very first time. Given emptiness, there is no form, no sensation, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sight, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object of mind. These words made very little sense to me the first time I heard them. Now, I have several degrees from fine academic institutions. I have good critical thinking skills. I even took a logic course, semester-long logic course in college. But these words made little sense. And the longer I stayed attending Dharma talks, I still didn't make any progress towards understanding any of the stuff up here in my head. But during these Dharma talks, some of the teachers would occasionally recite poems and they'd tell Zen stories. And the poems and the stories would feature images and metaphors that bypassed my logical mind and started to give me a sense down here of what was going on with this Zen Buddhism stuff. In another situation where I noticed my perspective beginning to change was when I went on nature walks during retreats. During these walks, I would inevitably notice things that I had never noticed before, like a gnarled stick or a shedded skin of a snake. And I'd find myself thinking about these things in a poetic or metaphorical way. And I'd also be curious about these things as a scientist. And I wanted to go home and do some Google research. And most interestingly, I discovered that my scientific curiosity and my poetic imagination could feed off each other, back and forth. And that's when I discovered the power of metaphor. Now, the word metaphor comes from Latin and Greek words meaning to carry over or transfer ownership. So the user of a metaphor alters the reference of the word or concept by carrying it from one semantic realm to another semantic realm. Jane Hirshfield, he was a well-known American poet with a strong Zen Buddhist background and an interest in science, said this about metaphor in her TED talk on the art of the metaphor. She said, A metaphor isn't true or untrue in any ordinary sense. Metaphors get under your skin by ghosting right past your logical mind. By the way, Jane Hirshfield gave a poetry writing workshop at the Zen Center last year, and I encourage you to check out and explore her poetry. So I discovered that for me, metaphors were an important key for unlocking some of the mysteries of Zen Buddhism. And so the rest of this talk is going to be devoted to using a metaphor to explore Zen Buddhism. And I'm going to choose a metaphor that's appropriate for this time of the year in Minnesota. So we're going to talk about snow and snowflakes. And I'm going to be going back and forth between science and Buddhism as we explore this metaphor. So to begin my research, I decided to go back to basics, all the way back to Buddha and the sutras, the early sutras. I wondered, well, what does Buddha have to say about snow? Well, it turns out the Buddha didn't have a lot to say about snow. Where he lived in India, there wasn't a lot of snow. In fact, when I looked up the official climate records for Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha was enlightened, I learned that the lowest official temperature ever recorded there in modern times, the lowest ever recorded temperature was 33 degrees Fahrenheit, just 1 degree above freezing. So I think we can safely say that Buddha rarely, if ever, saw snow. So after striking out with Buddha and snow, I decided I better move on, change my time period and change my location. I knew they had snow in China and Japan because I had seen references to that in poetry and haiku. So I thought, okay, where's a good place to go? Let's go. I'll go to Matsuo Basho. Basho is the famous 17th century Japanese poet who many consider to be the best poet of haiku of all time. So let's look at what he had to say about snow. Basho, here's one of his haikus. The cold, wintry wind, the throbbing pains of the swelling cheek, people's face. Now, I think that's a perfect description of wind chill. And here's another one from Basho. Let's go out to see the snow view where we slip and fall. So he talks about another thing that happens in the wintertime when we're out in the snow. We slip and fall. And if we don't break something, we'll probably, gets kind of embarrassing and maybe kind of humbling, but it can be fun. So when I read this haiku, I thought, hey, I kind of got inspired to say, maybe I can have some fun with these metaphors. I'm probably going to slip and fall flat on my face, but I'll have some fun and maybe you will too. So my next step on this journey was to do some serious research on the science of snow. Now, I thought I knew some basic facts about snow and snowflakes, but I've learned that, when you think you know some basic facts, sometimes you'll find out that these facts turn out to be myths. So I turned to the internet and I looked for some reliable sources. Now, I found some reliable sources, some good websites and videos, and I'm going to collect some of these links to some of these, and as well as links to some of these poems, and I'm going to put them in a document, which I'll include along with this recording of this video when we put it up on YouTube. So you can pursue this science of snow research by yourself and check my facts. Now, the next part of this talk is going to be a little bit like a science lecture. Sorry, or for better or worse, but I promise you, we'll get back to Zen Buddhism before too long. But let's talk first about how snowflakes are formed. So the first thing to know is that snowflakes are formed from water vapor. That's water as in the form of gas, not in the form of liquid. So up in the clouds, the water it's not liquid water that forms the snow. It's the air water vapor. Now up in the clouds, there's all these water vapor molecules zooming around, jostling around, bumping into each other, just like they do right here in your own room. There's water vapor molecules zooming around and bumping into each other. But up in the clouds, where it's much colder right now, they're moving much more slowly, and then with a lot less energy. And in fact, they're moving slowly enough that they would like to turn into liquid or ice. So now here's where I want you to use your imagination. Pretend that you're one of these water vapor molecules up in the cloud. You're moving slowly. You'd really like to join up with one of the other water vapor molecules or a bunch of them to form a drop of liquid or maybe some solid ice. But the problem is you can't find a place to get together and rest as you're moving around. It's kind of like a game of musical chairs, where the music keeps going and going and going, but there aren't any chairs set out for you. Can't sit down. So what we have is a situation called supersaturation or supercooling. All the conditions are right for the gas to turn into liquid or solid, but it just isn't happening. Now, you've probably seen supersaturation, supercooling with liquids. Have you ever left a bottle of pop or maybe beer outside where it's really cold, and the next day you look at it and you wonder, how could this still be liquid? And you pick it up. The moment you pick it up, it immediately turns and freezes solid. Well, that's because it's a supercooled liquid. And all it needed, those liquid molecules were ready to turn, they wanted to turn into salad. They just needed a chance, a little bump to get them started. Now, the same thing happens with the air, the water vapor molecules in the air when you're forming snowflakes. They just need something to get started. And what they need is a tiny speck of dust. That's how snowflakes get started, with a tiny speck of dust. So think of the speck of dust is providing the first set of chairs in this game of musical chairs. And once this set of chairs is provided, then the water vapor molecules can go and sit down. And then that's the first layer of ice. And that first layer provides the next set of chairs, and then another layer of ice forms. And then so and so, you can see how this just keeps building and building on top of each other. So, but there are some complications. It's not quite that simple, because these water vapor molecules just don't form a big solid ball of ice. You get snowflakes, and you get that because of the chemical properties of water molecules. So you can kind of think of it like the chairs are positioned in only special certain ways, so that as you add a new molecule, it can only be added in a certain configuration. And when you get line up all these configurations, that's how we end up with these six-sided symmetry of snowflakes. But there's a further complication, and that is that when these new sets of chairs become available, they only become available at certain locations on the flake. And wherever they become available, that's where the growth takes place. So that's why you can get like these long arms, six arms growing out from the corners of the snowflake without things growing at other places in the snowflake. So, but under different temperatures of different conditions of temperatures and humidity, the places where these chairs become available are different. And so you might, that's when you find out that you get different shapes of the snowflakes at different temperatures and humidities. In fact, scientists have discovered that there are 60 or more distinct shapes of snowflakes that can be formed under different conditions. And I'm going to share my screen again. And show you some of the different shapes of snowflakes that can appear under different conditions. This is a chart, and along the bottom, it shows that the temperature going from 32 degrees way down to -30. So it's going from warm to really cold. And as you're going up here, it's going from dry to more humid. And so you can see here's a condition right up here where you get the right temperature and humidity, and you get these lovely flakes that you think that's sort of the iconic idea of a snowflake. But down here, where it's colder and less humid, the snowflake actually looks like a column. Or over here, where it's a bit warmer, the snowflake looks like a needle. And so I was really kind of surprised to find out that there's all these different shapes of snowflakes. Yeah, I just tend to think of a flake looking like this. So it gets kind of complicated. But I hate to tell you, it's even more complicated. And that's because when a snowflake is being formed, it takes like 30 to 45 minutes. And as it's being formed, it might be floating around in the cloud, and it might be going through slightly different conditions. It might start up here, and after 5 minutes, it finds out it's in a place where the temperature is just a little bit cooler. That'd be going this way, or a little bit warmer, or it might be in a place where it's less humid. And so it starts out growing to be a shape like this, and then it gets down here, and starts turning into a shape that looks more like this. Anyway, so as it's being built, it gets turned into adding different shapes as it's being built. And so finally, after 30 or 45 minutes, it gets heavy enough to travel down to the ground. But each snowflake takes a different path in being built, and that's one reason why each snowflake is different. And so I was wondering whether it was a myth, whether each snowflake is different, but I found out that scientists do agree that each snowflake is unique. So there is, I'm going to show you some pictures of snowflakes. These snowflakes were grown by a scientist, physicist at Caltech, who has developed he's the Mr. Snowflake of the day. He's got a machine that he's built in his lab where he can grow individual snowflakes. He can change the temperature conditions. and the humidity, and he toggles the dials, and can create these designer snowflakes over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. And I posted in the chat room, one of the video that interviews him and shows him at work. This guy is also, he's been a consultant for Disney on their movie Frozen. He's written a number of award-winning books. His designs have been used for stamps. It's a fascinating video. So I urge you to check that out. So that's the end of the science lecture. Now we can go back to Buddhism. And we're going to see what's going on with this metaphor. So how does this relate to Buddhism? Well, we're going to relate it to a Zazen session. When you sit down for a Zazen session, you've got all these thoughts flowing around, going around, colliding with each other, and that's monkey mind. But all these thoughts going around, that's kind of like those water vapor molecules. But we can use our breath to allow those to settle. The breath is kind of like the speck of dust. So that's one kind of analogy that I like to draw. A second one is just like a snowflake goes through a variety of conditions, and each snowflake is unique. Each Zazen session is unique because you've come to your Zazen session with a unique set of conditions, and during the Zazen session there's a unique set of conditions. The car horn goes off, or your nose itches. You come to the session with just after a discussion with your boss, or an argument with your partner, or your cushion feels kind of lumpy that day, or the person next to you is snoring. So by the end of your Zazen session, you've had a unique session. Each Zazen session is unique, just like each snowflake is unique. But that means that if you have a wonderful Zazen session and you want to repeat it and do the same thing next time, you can't do it. It also means that if you have a terrible Zazen session and you decide, hey, I'm going to give this up, I'm never going to do this again, I can't meditate. Well, your next session is going to be different. So that's another similarity. And then the third similarity I'd like to point out is impermanence. You can catch a snowflake on your hand, start to admire it, and in a second, it's melted and gone. And with a Zazen session, when the bell rings, it's over and it's gone. Impermanence. So those are three ways that came to my mind as I was thinking about this metaphor. And then I thought of three other ways. If I had time, I'd go into those, but that's your homework. Come up to think of three other ways or more. So I had a lot of fun playing with this. And that's kind of what happens with metaphors for me. It's fun. They're bring out my creativity. They bring out my energy. I may have slipped and fell on my face a little bit, but it was fun. And I think, although my metaphors come from science because that's my interest, your metaphors may come from wherever your passion is, wherever your calling is. It might be woodworking, it might be soccer, biking, or cooking. So if you let your imagination run wild, like I did with this, you're going to find some interesting metaphors. And I hope you let me know what you discover. So now, but now I want to return to a point I made near the beginning of my talk, when I said that Buddha never experienced snow. But, is that really true? We can use our imagination. What if he were here in Minnesota? What do you think about snow? Well, it turns out that there's a creative poet used his imagination to think about snow and Buddha, and wrote a poem called Shoveling Snow with Buddha. This poet is Billy Collins. He's a very famous American poet. He was the poet laureate of the US from 2001 to 2003. He's been a Imperial Companion. He's written 19 books of poetry. This poem is full, we got humor, and it's got a message that aligns with Buddhism. I wanted to read it, but I realized it takes 4 minutes. I don't have time. So I posted a link to it in the chat. I urge you to check it out. So I'm getting close to the end. But I want to take a step back make this kind of even bigger than it is. I was just comparing a snowflake to a Zazen session. But what about if we compare a snowflake to our life? Well, I think some of the same things apply. In our lives, in people's lives, it's hectic and scattered. Our lives are full of overwhelming with desires and regrets and demands and fears. And it's been the experience of some of us and many of us that meditation can serve as a way of helping kind of center that, ground that, and bring us to a better place where there's less suffering. So meditation, the practice of meditation, in this case, serves like the dust of the snow that creates the snowflake. And just like the snowflake, each snowflake is unique, each person is unique. Through the course of your life, you're going through all sorts of different conditions, meeting all sorts of people, and we're all going to be unique. And then there's impermanence. At the end, we're all going to melt like a snowflake. Now, a snowflake turns into water, and it becomes part of the water cycle. It might end up in a lake or an ocean, or it might evaporate, go up in a cloud, and come down like in a rain, and it waters a plant, it turns into a flower. So what happens when we die? Well, that's kind of the big question that all religions have to grapple with. So we can turn to some great Buddhist leaders to see what they have to say about it. And there's kind of a tradition among great Buddhist leaders to write a poem or a haiku as they're nearing their deathbed. And so I found one of those that I think is relevant to what we've been talking about. This came from Gozan, who's a Japanese monk in 1789. This is his deathbed haiku. The snow of yesterday that fell like cherry blossoms is water once again. And we had a great Buddhist leader that just passed away on Saturday. And Thich Nhat Hanh, And he was one of the people that I was the first people that I read, and he's just got a way of expressing things that are very simple and yet profound. And as I was looking at some of the memorial quotations and things that people were posting, I found this one. And you might notice the mention of snow. When conditions are sufficient, a cloud transforms into rain, snow, or hail. The cloud has never been born, and it will never die. This insight of signlessness and interbeing helps us recognize that all lives continue in different forms. Nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, and everything is in transformation. So I'm going to leave that on the screen, and that's where I would like to end this talk and give you a chance to give me your thoughts and provide some feedback or ask some questions. So please unmute yourself and